Hi everyone, Amy here with my midweek updates for week 5. I'm mostly going to focus on your writing prompt discussion in this video, but don't forget to check out the news because I've posted several things there already this week. Of course, your to-do list, which also has some instructions for the campaign analysis blog essay, which is going to be due in rough draft form on this coming Wednesday. I've also set up a survey so that I can get some preliminary feedback for you. I know students always do course evaluations at the end of the semester, but that's kind of after the time when I can make any interventions and actually act on the things that you're all suggesting. So I like to do a middle of the semester evaluation as well. So if you have the time, I would appreciate it if you would go and take the survey. It is anonymous. I won't know what your responses are unless you disclose that in some way. And it's completely optional, so I'm not going to take away any points if you don't do it or something like that. In fact, I wouldn't even know because it's anonymous. So if you take the time to do that, I would really appreciate it. I also had some feedback on your discussions from last week that I posted, so if you get a chance, please look at that as well. And then I will try to extend those thoughts into my discussion of the discussions that you're doing for this week as well. So this week's writing prompt was a synthesis assignment, and when we're conducting synthesis, we're typically talking about bringing things together to forge a new whole, and there's a lot of compare-contrast involved in that bringing things together part, and so that's why I'm asking you to look for common themes, things that they agree about, things that they disagree about, and then the forging the new whole portion is addressed when you free write your opinions based on what you've read in these multiple sources. So everyone did a good job addressing all parts of the assignment, and I'm just going to talk about ways to push your ideas just a little bit further for each of these tasks. So starting with the summary that you began with for points A and B here, I just want to remind you some of the summary strategies. You want to represent the thesis and the main points, but none of the evidence, and also remain objective in this summary portion because the purpose of summary is to be objective and not give your opinion. Let me try to pull out some examples of that. So here in Nikki's, you know, it is an argument, so you could be a little more specific as to the persuasive purpose in your language here, but good job introducing the article, definitely. This does have a overall discussion of the central claim and a preview of the main points, so that was pretty strong. Let's look at another one. Here from Amber's, this was another one that did a good job introducing, covering most of the central claim and previewing the main points. One thing that I saw that was missing from a lot of the summaries of the Mitchell article was his call to action at the end, and I noticed when I followed the links that there are actually, because when I originally viewed this it was all on one page and it's now being broken up into 2 pages. So if you didn't go to the second page, make sure you go back and reread the article there, because there is actually a second page that for some reason it's not letting me go to right now, and that contains most of the proposal. Here we go, part of his argument. So if you didn't get to this last section, I think that may be why that proposal was left out of several of your representations of Mitchell's thesis. So just make sure you're reading the entire article before you complete the assignment. Then for this next prompt, B, regarding each writer's angle of vision, this is where I saw you all struggling the most. I saw many of you writing, rewriting the thesis, so to speak, instead of the actual angle of vision. So David's was the first one that I saw doing that, and I actually jumped in on Tuesday and tried to redirect. So here, David says, Mitchell's angle of vision is mainly the perspective looking at all the damage that man-made pollution has caused, and if it can't be stopped early, we'll pay the consequences later. And Robert's angle of vision is more broad. He agrees with Mitchell that climate change is happening, but not nearly as much of a concern, and we can't dictate that we are entirely the problem. So this actually matches up with what you've said here in your summaries of the author's theses, and I just want to make the distinction that angle of vision is not the same as the explicitly stated thesis of the article, angle of vision is more an underlying quality that influences the argument that's being written. So angle of vision relates to anything about the writer's background, their personality, their values, who they are as a person that would influence their thesis or the way that the argument gets written. So it's not the thesis itself, or it's not exactly the same as the thesis itself, but it's the values and the beliefs that influence that writer to adopt the thesis that they are arguing for. So reading between the lines, and this is what I'm trying to get you guys to do a little bit more and more, I would say that Mitchell is much more of an environmentalist than Roberts. Robert seems to be more of a pragmatist, not necessarily someone who believes that we should try to protect the environment for any ethical kinds of reasons. He's more interested in, you know, doing things for a particular outcome, not just because it's the right thing to do. Beyond that, I would say that Mitchell is probably much more of a liberal point of view, and Roberts is more of a conservative point of view. I would say that Roberts is a little more, especially economically conservative, whereas Mitchell is willing to spend the money it would take to make these interventions. I know one of you brought up in your reflections at the end some questions, and one of them was what would be the economic impact of transitioning away from fossil fuels, and I think that Mitchell sees that as a necessary evil, or just growing pains kind of what we need to do to mitigate this problem, and that to me indicates that he is willing to assume that cost, and Roberts on the other hand sees that as a much greater cost that's not worth the benefit that we might gain from alleviating or intervening with, I should say, climate change. So again, it's everything about how they grew up. You know, maybe Roberts is more wealthy than Mitchell. Maybe Mitchell is a scientist himself. Maybe one of these people is more educated than the other. It's difficult to tell in an editorial article like this because you don't get a ton of information about the writer, and these people aren't famous. But for the writers of the articles that we're reading for class, and certainly the ads that you're analyzing, you can Google those people or those organizations and find out more about their background, their angle of vision, their history. If it's an organization, they might even have a mission statement on their website, and those are the things that will convey to you what the writer's angle of vision is, and from there you can look for all the ways that it's kind of bleeding through into the text, although it is not going to be explicitly stated in the text. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then a good example that I saw that I thought might help all of you kind of see the distinction that I'm making here was in Tabitha's original post. So Tabitha, when you talked about angle of vision here, you said Mitchell's angle of vision is in support of renewable energy and ridding ourselves of oil and coal dependency, improving Earth's future, and preventing natural disasters. This was probably the closest thing I saw in all of your posts to true angle of vision. This is, again, very still close to what he says in his thesis, but this kind of gets at what I was saying before in terms of the idea that Mitchell's probably more of a liberal environmentalist as opposed to Roberts being more of a conservative pragmatist or a capitalist or something like that. And then here again, this is kind of more just the same as his thesis, but this was a good start, Tabitha, so good job with that. For the most part, all of you were able to pick out the common themes. These were very similar across all of the posts. So as you do your comments to each other for tomorrow night, I would encourage you maybe to try to push each other a little bit further on that. I mean, obviously the biggest theme that's in common between the two is that climate change is a thing, okay? And then in terms of agreement, both of them agree that humans have some influence, and both of them agree that climate change is affecting the environment. They're just contradicting each other on the ways that it's affecting the environment. And I think most of you did a pretty good job capturing that in your responses. But then the other thing I wanted to talk about pretty in depth was your free write of your own responses, and this is the true heart of synthesis, because this is when you're forging the new whole to create your own opinion that you might ultimately want to make an argument about. And a lot of you were very in-depth in your thoughts and did a good job developing those thoughts, but I would actually try to encourage you to be a little bit more skeptical. So I think some of you are just barely scratching the surface right now. And one thing that a mentor said to me one time that really resonated was that first thoughts aren't always the best thoughts. And this kind of speaks to why we do revision in writing in general, but the first time you write something down, that's just your initial thought. That thought thought is going to grow and develop, and that's what I'm hoping to see as you comment on each other's posts and go back and forth and then ultimately reflect at the end of the week. So I'll really be interested to see if some of your thoughts change as you read what your classmates have written, as you respond to one another, and as you think these thoughts through a little bit further so that they're not necessarily your first thoughts anymore and that they can get to be stronger, better thoughts. So in general, I wanted you guys to just be a little bit more skeptical of the articles. Let's go look at Robert's article for just a second. He does talk about some sources kind of generally, and my internet is being slow, so I'm just waiting here because I want to reference some of these things. I'll go ahead and get the Mitchell one going too. Okay. So this is what what Roberts says. He's responding directly to the Mitchell article. I would say that he probably doesn't have a source for this because 100% of scientists would never be represented in any source. All climate scientists here, again, that's not really an actual figure. I wouldn't expect that I could go look this up somewhere because he's just kind of generalizing. Climate scientists in general here again. No citation for this source. He could just be making this up. He does have a NASA quote in here, so that's pretty strong. And then no other sources referenced for any of the other information in the text, which for me is a really big red flag. This I would expect, sorry, that's from the Mitchell article. This I would expect to be able to look up because those are some really precise facts as well as the United Nations information. But this general discussion of science that's kind of pervasive throughout the article is a real red flag for me that maybe he himself is not part of the population of scientists. Whereas Mitchell, on the other hand, has a specific figure, so this is kind of similar to what I was showing you over here. I would expect to be able to look this up somewhere and find confirmation of the numbers, and I would expect that here too. He's also got some pretty credible sources mentioned right up front. He's got lots of quotes and paraphrase. He's got, excuse me, I had to sneeze, some really specific information that I would expect to be able to look up somewhere. And even though there's not a whole lot of evidence in the second half, he's got some really credible sources here, like the Brookings Institute, which is a very high-level data mill kind of place that does a lot of really credible research. So just because someone says scientists, don't necessarily assume that they know what they're talking about. And I'm going to kind of touch on that again as I talk a little bit more about some of the stronger responses that I saw, which the strongest ones I saw really were Tabitha and Katie's. You guys put a lot of thought into yours. Here, Tabitha says, I would like to see Robert's evidence, besides carbon dioxide accelerating plant growth, that the climate change would be good for our society. While it's true that it will create more precipitation and help crops, more precipitation along with our glaciers melting will also rise sea levels, making Mitchell's point about displacing millions of coastal families true. They both bring up valid points, but the fact is we can't tell in the future. We can't tell the future. All we can do is treat Earth better because it's the only one we have. One thing is certain, polluting oceans and rivers and water is the most counterintuitive thing we could be doing, not only for the ecosystems that depend on the water, but for our future generations who will obviously depend on the water too. We need to leave the Earth better than we found it. So this omission, the fact that Roberts has completely left out the idea of rising sea levels, speaks to angle of vision as well. Anytime you're looking at selection and omission of details, that can reveal angle of vision. So where I was talking about Mitchell probably being more of an environmentalist than Roberts before, this is a good indicator of that. The fact that Roberts either isn't aware or is choosing on purpose to leave this point out shows that he's definitely not coming at it from an environmentalist point of view. And then Tabitha, I would say that your angle of vision is probably similar to Mitchell's, because here you're looking at this almost from an ethical perspective, in that even if we're not going to have ultimately the perfect solution, it's still the right thing to do. It doesn't make any sense to continue to pollute our earth. And so this is a really kind of well-founded point of view here that I thought was a good synthesis to forge that new whole. And then Katie's was probably the most in-depth response of anyone's for the entire week so far. And so I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I think Katie makes some really good points about the fact that Quinn doesn't seem to really know what he's talking about. So this is where I would invite the rest of you to maybe be a little more skeptical, read between the lines a little bit more, think about the things that he's either glossing over or leaving out intentionally and how that might be trying to manipulate you as a reader, which is kind of the goal of all of this. And your open discussions this week are just getting started, so I won't spend too much time there, but good luck with that over the rest of the